Hi, Dina.
Hi, Rabbi.
How are you?
I'm doing well. How about you?
Good.
Yeah?
Yeah. I have us at verse 3.
Correct.
Excuse me. Chapter 20, verse 3.
Chapter 20, right. Not chapter 20. Verse 3. Oh, that's right. We're giving out the... Okay, it's giving out the 10 Commandments. Okay.
Is the... Okay. You shall have no other gods beside me.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a different translation, which I think is kind of interesting. You shall not recognize the gods of others in my presence.
In his oh my, I don't.
Read that one more time. It's a really interesting translation.
You shall not recognize the gods of others in my presence.
So the gods of others. So it's really interesting. So Elohim Acherim. You could translate that as the gods of others. Al Panai, in my presence. I understand, but recognize that I don't see here. Lo yihiyeh lecha, there shall not be for you, is how I would translate it. But I like the end of it. The gods of others in my presence. That's interesting.
I guess it's a reflection of the period in which they were living. Other people recognize other gods. You should not have those gods while you're observing your allegiance to me.
Right. So Rashi actually says the verse cannot read to say, you shall have no other gods than me, for it would be an insult to God to call the others gods with respect to God, to Adonai.
Mm-hmm.
But what did other people call there?
Oh, they also call them gods.
Yeah.
No. I mean, there's lots of times where people call things and they're wrong about them.
Yeah. I mean, the way we deal with this is it's all those other gods we write with a small g, and then our God is big G.
Right. I understand that.
Yeah, well, see, the Greeks and the Romans gave names to their gods.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have a comment, but it goes with also the next two verses.
Okay.
So do we want to take a look at those and then we can...
Yeah, let me just read. Nachmanides has a really long... wait a second. Sorry, no, that was from before. The correct interpretation, even according to the Straight, none of the angels or the divine host of gods... None of the angels or the divine host of heaven are to be our gods.
Yeah, but that goes more with 4.
No, that goes with 3.
Well, I kind of have that comment with 4.
Right. When the text says other gods, it always refers to these beings. Idols are never referred to as if they could be other gods. And then he put in parentheses, God forbid. But only as molten gods, gods from the perspective of those who make them. For they are not gods, but man's handiwork of wood and stone. Thus, the second commandment is that we accept none other than the Lord as our God, and then that we should not worship graven images. So, the way I understand this is that it sounds to me like they're struggling. If we don't go, Dina, with the translation that you have, gods of others, but instead we stick with other gods, that's a problem. That's problematic for the rabbis because it acknowledges
that other people recognize other gods.
Right, that there are other gods. So what they do is, excuse the chair in front of me. So what they do is they say, it's not referring to the gods of others, Roman gods, Greek gods. It's referring to the angels and what did it say? The
Ghosts.
Hosts.
hosts of heaven.
Hosts. I thought you said ghosts.
No, hosts.
So there are these sort of semi divine beings, and we should go ahead.
So I have that comment with verse 4.
All right.
It says, Rambam and Ramban and others trace the development of idolatry from early history when it was clear to all that there was a creator. People began to feel that by showing respect for the intermediaries through which God controls the universe, they were displaying reverence for him, much as one honors a king or president by showing respect to his emissaries and ministers. Then in time, people began to believe that these forces and beings had independent powers and came to worship them as independent entities. At first, they worshiped the angels, which are heavenly spiritual beings. In time, the cult spread to the heavenly bodies and even to people of exceptional ability, such as Pharaoh and Nebuchadnezzar. The idolaters felt that their worship would increase the power of the heavenly force or the king that guided their destinies, because they would have the merit of the multitudes in addition to their own considerable powers. Later, the corruption spread even to the worship of Shadim, or demons, evil semi-spiritual beings. The prohibition in this verse, and it's talking about verse 4, refers to all beings of any form that can conceivably be worshipped.
So Sforno sort of has an agreement to that. You shall have no other gods, even though you accept my sovereignty. You shall serve none except me, even as one serves the ministers, literally the servant of a king, akin to, and then there's Hebrew, sorry. They feared Hashem and served their own gods. Before me, he says, for it is not permitted to show honor to a king's servants in his presence, and I am omnipresent. Hence all places are equally before me.
Keep going. I'm sorry.
That's it.
Yeah, I have in my presence, which was my translation, as long as I exist. Since God is eternal, this prohibition too is permanent. To defy a human king to his face is the worst form of treason. Idolatry is an unpardonable affront.
All these telephone calls.
Right.
Yeah, I found that, don't do this in my presence for an omnipresent.
Yeah.
And, that, you can only, it's essentially, you can only break the rule in one circumstance, and that circumstance is impossible.
Right. Yeah. Okay, I'm seeing Freda's empty chair and I'm not hearing anybody.
That's because the rabbi's on the phone.
The rabbi's on the phone too?
It seems
okay.
It seems to me that
That'll do it.
It seems to me that these are commandments coming down, at the 10 Commandments coming down, and the first one is about you'll have no other God before me. It seems that even God is recognizing that these are people coming out of a society that recognizes so many other gods that he has to caution them again and again. There is no other God other than our one God, and that he has to take them step by step away from this other society.
Right. And the next verse continues that, because the next verse talks about that's essentially making idols.
Yes, right.
Which we haven't read yet.
No, but as I said, coming out of a society,
you're right,
always had idols all around them for every different part of the universe.
Not just idols, but a belief of the people that Pharaoh was a god.
One God.
Right.
Mm-hmm. We're the chosen people.
Yeah, but we're not chosen to be special. We're chosen to be a messenger.
I went away. Excuse me. My other daughter-in-law called.
Okay.
Babysitting request.
Oh,
Where are we, folks?
well, we're still kind of looking at 3 because your son left.
He's
Oh.
on the phone.
Oh, okay. Yeah, he said he had a lot of funerals this week.
Yes, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I missed what you guys said when I stepped away. I'm sorry.
Well, it wasn't.
There is more vamping on the same.
It wasn't that profound.
Yeah, I understand that. Yes.
Okay.
Well, I have something here from Rashi, an alternative explanation of other gods. Well, I already read Sforno, and he said they should be considered like servants of a king, and you don't show respect to the servants of a king in the presence of the king. But here it says, other gods is that they are other. That is, that they are strangers to those who worship them. Their worshippers cry out to them, but they do not answer them. Oh, so yeah, these other gods don't answer their worshippers. It is as if the god were an other who never knew his worshipper. I don't understand that.
Say it again.
It's the god is other. It's as if the god were an other who never knew the worshiper. A god who does not know his worshiper or her worshiper.
As distinguished from the God that we know, who has
Hashem.
been known to us.
Right. He is known to us. These are, well, I don't know. This says the God does not know the worshiper.
Right.
The other God.
Well, those other gods
Right.
are impersonal gods. I mean, whereas ours seems to be, he's making himself out to be a more personal god. He's set God's self as our protector, as our judge, as our all the.
Not only that, but God has revealed.
Right.
At Sinai.
Exactly. He spoke to us or tried.
Right. Where another God.
All right. So the Hebrew, the paragraph ends al panai, which has been translated as beside me, but it says some take the words translated as beside me to mean in addition to, not only in place of.
Right.
It is forbidden to worship idols along with God.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Arama, I don't know who that is, takes this passage not as a prohibition but as a promise. As long as you have me, you will not need any others.
Ah, that's lovely. That's lovely.
That's taking verse 2 and 3 together, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That's just the comment on 3.
Right, but basically, if I am your God who took you out of Egypt, then lo yelecha, you won't need other gods before me.
Yeah, but it's they're riffing on the translation of al panai,
right,
as in addition to.
Right. That's nice.
I'm trying very hard to stay away from the next verse till we get there.
All right, let's get there. Go, Dina.
Okay, so my translation says, "You shall not make yourself a carved image, nor any likeness of that which is in the heavens above, or on the earth below, or in the water beneath the earth."
Right. Okay.
That's pretty close to what I have.
Right. Yeah, because the other civilizations have a god for the water, for the sea.
So what they're talking about here, it seems, is in the heavens, the sun, the moon, stars, and constellations, and angels. The waters under the earth includes demons. Ooh, listen to this. The Mechilta adds that it also includes one's image reflected in the water.
Oh.
So don't, when you look at
Don't
yourself in the
worship
water,
yourself.
don't worship yourself.
Right. Don't look in mirrors then either.
Yeah.
Huh.
And then I assume that on the earth means other people
Mhm.
or animals, I guess.
Uh-huh.
All right, I'm gonna continue half of 5 so that we can talk it all together. You shall not prostrate yourself to them, nor worship them, for I am Hashem your God. And that's as far as I'm going.
Mhm.
It says, so my comment says, this commandment, this whole thing, 3, 4, and half of 5, comprises 4 separate negative injunctions. A, it is forbidden to believe in idols. B, it is forbidden to make or possess them.
Mhm.
C, it is forbidden to worship them through any of the 4 forms of divine service, which are prostration, animal slaughter, bringing offerings or libations of wine or other liquids upon an altar.
And what's 4?
I think bring offerings is 3 and libations is 4.
Oh, okay.
And D, it is forbidden to worship an idol by a means that is unique to it, even if such a method is not used for other deities, and even if the service would be considered disrespectful in any other context. But listen to this. For example, the idol Peor was worshipped through public defecation, and the believers of Merculus, Mercury, worshipped it by throwing stones at it. If performed before other idols, such acts would be permitted expressions of contempt. But to the worshippers of Peor and Merculus, they are the prescribed forms of worship and are therefore forbidden to be performed before those idols. So it's okay to throw stones at every other idol except for Merculus.
Right, because that's how you're supposed to worship.
Right.
Wow.
So you have to know how people are honoring their gods before you can dishonor them.
Before you cannot do that. Right. Huh.
So the comment says that making carved images or likenesses, this verse prohibits not only the worship but the manufacture of idols. Oh, there goes terach. A carved image is a 3-dimensional accurate representation of something, while a likeness is a symbolic image which may be either sculpted, drawn, or produced in any other way. So the other comment, so in Eitz Chaim it says, God is not merely invisible, that is, possessing a shape we cannot see. God has no physical form. It is only our limited human imagination that drives us to think of God as a heavenly being with bodily parts. To picture God is to limit God, male, not female, old, not young, of one specific race and skin color. Heschel suggests that we may not make an image of God because we ourselves would bear the divine image in this world. We alone are God's agent, not any idol we might fashion. A homiletic interpretation of the same words comes to a contrasting conclusion. You shall not make yourself into an idol and come to believe that you are God.
So that what you just read about limiting God, that when you draw a picture, you're limiting God.
Right.
And the example you gave about male versus female, God is a he versus a she.
Mm-hmm.
That's always been my argument against using he.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a gender issue.
No.
It's not that I think God is a she. It's that as soon as you say he, you're limiting God.
You put a gender on it, right?
And you're limiting God.
Mm-hmm.
And if the whole idea is that God is limitless.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's just it. We don't say God the Father. We say God our sovereign.
Well, no, we say the Father.
We do?
I'm sure. Avinu Malkeinu. Our Father, our King.
Our Father, our King.
Yeah.
So you give them
Yeah,
a
that's
male.
true. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this idea that we all have a spark of the divine in us.
No word other than parent to encompass both.
Right.
This idea.
Wait, Dina, we can hear you, but just hold on one second. Because Muriel just said that, I mean, yes, we do call God male.
Mhm.
When we call God a father, you're right.
If you call him father and
Right.
Mhm.
But that's the limit of human beings, of the language of human beings, specifically male human beings who did all these writings.
That's right. That's it.
well, we've always
Right. So
Yeah.
that
male before female.
So, well, yeah, look, just like the entire Torah is limited in the sense that we wrote it, if we did write it, right?
Mhm.
Our prayer book is the same way. So we may but the fact that we are human limits the way we can give expression to our beliefs.
Mhm.
And you're right that even though we don't believe that God is a he, we use masculine imagery all the time.
Mhm.
The problem, I think, is that we have taken that literally.
Yes.
And so we now imagine God as a man up in heaven with a long beard who looks like my rabbi, you know? That's bubkus. That was never the intent.
No.
You know, by referring to God as our Father, you're evoking certain, so the way I think of it is, mothers who used to say, "Wait till your father gets home," right? And in Avinu Malkeinu, that really is, that's what we're trying to evoke, is that God is judging, God is going to punish you. I mean, that's what Avinu Malkeinu is.
Mhm.
We've made mistakes, we've sinned, please don't be too harsh on us. In other prayers, presumably, you would want to evoke different
Mhm.
ideas or emotions, and so you use different language.
Mhm.
But we took Avinu literally,
Yes.
and that's our fault. Sorry, Dina, go ahead.
So this idea that we all have a spark of the divine in us needs to be tempered, I guess is the word, with the idea that we have a spark of the divine, but we are not the divine.
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. And as far apart as spark of the divine and the divine are, it seems that for us it's a very gray area. That is to say, it's too easy for us to say, because I have a spark of the divine, I am therefore the divine.
Yeah, I guess there are people.
And we do that all the time.
Oh yes.
I mean, we do that. Whenever if, and this is a big if, but if, Dina, here we go. Ready? If we believe that God told us, don't start a fire on a Shabbat, don't eat shellfish, all these things. If we really believe that, and we still start fires on Shabbat and eat shellfish, then we really are saying we're more important than God.
Mm-hmm.
We are more divine than the divine. Because our will supersedes that of God's will. Mm-hmm. If we really believe all those things.
So it all boils down to if. That little two-letter word.
I agree. I think you're absolutely right. And in fact, in my last video, my last roar, I talked about how what has plagued the conservative movement, I think, is their inability to say, not if, but here's what we believe, right? This is it. And to stop apologizing. We're so concerned, the conservative movement, we're so concerned with being a halachic movement, a movement that believes in Jewish law, that we're afraid to acknowledge that we're really not. We're not. Mm-hmm. And because we don't acknowledge that, we get ourselves all twisted up in, we say we believe this, but we act like this, which seemed to me to be incompatible. Mm-hmm. So yes, it's all about that if. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I went off the reservation a little bit.
That's okay.
But I think for you're saying about the conservative movement, is that the conservative movement off the rails, or is that a sort of schism between the conservative
movement and the people who belong to it?
The people who are the decision makers and trying to describe the movement, and the people who are ostensibly following.
Right. So what I was talking about was an article, which was a really good article actually, about the two viable options for the conservative movement. One viable option is that they should say what we've been saying all along about being a Jewish legal movement and really wanting to take the idea of obligation seriously, that they should do that and shout it from the rooftops and just become a much smaller movement. Because there are members of the conservative movement who buy into that and who want a halachic, egalitarian Jewish experience. And the conservative movement could embrace those people and really be that.
Mm-hmm.
It would be a much smaller movement. It would be, 5% of the size that it is now.
Mm-hmm.
But it could be that. The other viable option was to say, enough with the games.
Mm-hmm.
The leaders can say whatever they want, but if the masses don't buy into that, then what are you leading?
Mm-hmm.
Who are you leading? Right? If I say, everyone, let's go right, and everyone goes left, I'm not really leading anyone. So the other viable option, according to this one article, was that the conservative movement should acknowledge that there's very little that distinguishes us from the Reform movement, and we should instead merge to form one liberal movement of Judaism, which is what I think has been happening all along.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's either, as Dina, as you said, the difference between what the movement believes and what its adherents believe,
Mm-hmm.
or there's a divide between what the leaders of the movement, as you said, Andrew, say and do, and what the adherents say and do. But regardless,
Mm-hmm.
the fact that this dilemma was really embodied by its tagline, the conservative movement's tagline for many years, tradition and change.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no. Yeah, maybe, but that's so
Broad.
And it's what's the word?
It's almost do as you please.
It's so undefined.
Mm-hmm.
It's so undefined, and there's too much room there.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't defined enough, and no one therefore knew what it meant. So some people held onto the tradition side,
Mm-hmm.
some people held onto the change side, and now you're seeing tradition and change
Mm-hmm.
being split down the middle. I'm not really making any sense.
No,
You make sense.
And I agree with you that I feel that as years and years go by, as I see it in my children and I see it in my grandchildren, that the conservative group will merge into the reform group. I see that. I think so. Because we believe in the tenets of what we were told to do, the justice of Judaism, the kindness, the unity of Judaism, without all of the little details on how to observe it.
Right. There are a couple of things that are still getting in the way of a merger. Patrilineal descent is one.
Mm-hmm.
Interfaith marriage is another.
Mm-hmm.
Those are both going to be resolved in the next 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
The conservative
It
movement's
has
going
to.
to buy into both of those
It
in the
has
next
to.
10 years.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that I agree that it has to, but it's going to.
Mm-hmm.
What are the two things, please?
Patrilineal descent, so that you're Jewish, whether your mother's Jewish or your father's Jewish.
Uh-huh.
That to me is a no-brainer, but
Mhm.
that's just me.
Yeah. No,
And the other one is interfaith marriage.
no, I agree with you.
And that's going to it's just going to change. There's no way around it.
Well, talk about the father with descent. When I was growing up, I had a very good friend mother was not Jewish, father was Jewish. Most of her friends were Jewish. She leaned to Judaism.
Right.
We accepted her as a Jew. We had no question of it. We never asked that question. And when it was time for her, she was going with somebody during the wartime. They're both in college. She was going with somebody, and the boy said to her, "We won't tell my parents that you're Jewish." He accepted her as Jewish.
Yeah.
And she said, "Well, I don't need you anymore."
Mm.
And she married a Jewish person.
Yeah.
So no one questioned her
Right.
when she got married whether her mother or father was Jewish.
Right.
It
You-
didn't in my day.
In many ways, that's although I officially don't accept patrilineal descent
Mhm.
because I'm part of the conservative movement,
Right. Mhm.
unofficially I do. Because if somebody comes to me and says, I want to join your synagogue, or I want to have a bar mitzvah, or I want,
Mhm.
and I'm Jewish, I don't say, is your mother Jewish? If you tell me you're Jewish, you're Jewish.
Right.
I trust you.
Well, that's what it was. And it didn't happen until almost the birth of Israel that it
Mhm.
really became a conscious thing.
Right, and a contentious thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Dave,
What is the difference?
Hold on one second, Mom. I'm sorry.
What is the difference or this line between the Orthodox and the conservative?
So
What happens with
that's
the
also
Orthodox?
gotten muddled.
Mhm.
I mean, look, Orthodox Jews are much, much farther away from even considering patrilineal descent or interfaith marriage. I mean, if that ever happens, that's 50 year. That I don't know that will ever happen. But the essential difference, I think. Well, wait. The essential difference between Orthodox Judaism and the vast majority of conservative Jews, you and me, is that Orthodox Jews believe that they believe in obligation, that God gives us rules that we have to follow. You and I don't really think that.
Wait,
We
wait,
thought-
you froze a minute. Please say that again. You froze a minute.
I said Orthodox Judaism and Orthodox Jews, for the most part, believe that God gives us rules that we are obliged to follow. An Orthodox Jew would not think about eating at a non-kosher restaurant.
Mhm.
It simply would not come up because they are obliged to not do that. You and I decide in every moment, do I want to, do I not want to? We don't buy into the idea of obligation, right? That God gave us rules that we have to follow. We just don't buy into that. And maybe it's because, going back to what we said before, maybe it's because that little spark of God that's inside of us has gotten a little too big, right? Maybe we think that we're more important than God is.
That free will that God gave us, where you practice.
Right.
Everything.
And this is important. I didn't say the difference between Orthodox and conservative because if you look at that small sliver of conservative Jews who really do want to be conservative Jews, they do believe in obligation, right? They believe that we're obligated, and but they have also, especially in regard to social issues, women's equality, things like that, they've pushed the boundaries a little bit. But there are very few of those people in the conservative world. Very few. I don't know that there's one person in our shul, not one person, that believes they are obligated. And at Temple Beth Abraham, I would guess that Dina is one of the only ones, if not the only one. Do you agree, Dina, or no?
Yes and no.
Okay.
That's a good one. How do you do that?
Well, because
Because she's a conservative Jew.
right,
No.
right, and we don't know what we stand for. No, because as much as I would like to believe that we're obligated, truthfully, in action, I don't act that way all the time.
Right. Right.
So I think you're correct in saying that in any conservative shul,
Right.
I think that that's true. That, you might have one, but that's what the conservative movement has done to us, though. I believe, by not standing for anything. I mean, this has been going on for years. They came out with that Emet Ve'emuna document that said nothing.
Right.
There wasn't any meat in it. There wasn't anything that told you what the conservative movement stood for.
Right. And by the way, I just want to go back to what you said before, when you said, I may believe it, but I don't act like it.
Right.
And I have long felt that saying that we're a halachic movement when we don't act like it is just absurd. And now, I should say, by the way, that Rabbi Creditor, Menachem Creditor, my dear friend, he would completely disagree with me, because for him halacha is not stuck or stagnant, and for him obligation cannot only come from God above. It can come from God within. So he would completely disagree with me here. But to my mind, if you believe that God told you to do something, then you do it.
Mm-hmm.
There's no discussion. If God, the creator of heaven and earth, who created me and who could take me out like that,
Mm-hmm.
if God said to me, don't drive to synagogue on Shabbat, guess what? I'm not going to drive to synagogue on
Mm-hmm.
Shabbat. I'm going to arrange my life in such a way that I can walk to shul. And traditional Jews do just that, because they do believe that. But we don't. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
There's a difference between, and this is where some of the gray area comes in. What we are obligated, what I am obligated to by God, is not necessarily what the rabbis have told me I'm obligated to.
Correct.
And that's where I think some of the problems come in.
Yes.
God never said don't drive to shul on Shabbos.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I would take that a step further, Dina, and I want to say it was Nachmanides, but I'm not sure about that. That I remember learning that. No, you know what? It's I'm forgetting who it is now. But basically, the idea is that we are okay. I've given this example before. You've probably heard it, Dina. I don't know if you have. So let's say that a stranger were to come in right now, knock on my door and say, Rabbi, I need to talk to you. Someone I'd never met before. I would say, I'd love to talk to you, but right now I'm busy with a class.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If my mother were to right now say, David, I have something important, I need to talk to you, I would have to say goodbye to all of you, and I would give her my attention.
Honor your mother
right?
and father, right?
Well, it's not just honor my mother and father. It's that I feel more obliged to those with whom I have a relationship.
Okay.
The depth of my relationship determines the extent to which I feel obligated to them. Right? So the argument is, if you don't feel obligated to God, it's because you don't have a deep enough relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
And to take that a step further, God only obligates you to things that you are ready to be obligated for.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So, Dina, what you said about I'm not obligated to what the rabbi said, maybe it's even that none of us are obligated in the same way. The way God obligates me is unique to my relationship with God. And the way God obligates you is unique to your relationship with God. So if you have a deep relationship with God, you may feel that tug of obligation, but it's going to be a unique tug for you and a unique tug for me. The flip side of that is that that's a cop-out. Stop complaining and just do what God says.
And it makes it very difficult. I'm sorry, Andrew, I'm going to shut up in a minute. It makes it very difficult to have a movement where everyone is individually obligated.
Making their own
Yes.
decisions.
Although, it hasn't hurt the reform movement.
Well, I was going to say I think I've asked you if my sort of elevator pitch versions of the three most movements are far off, and let me repeat them to see if you still agree. That basically the Orthodox say that what they're doing is based on the Torah, and what the rabbis interpreted is based on the Torah. What the conservatives say is that we believe in the laws of the Torah, but what the rabbis interpreted was based on their point in time. And so the rabbinical interpretations might change based on time periods. And the reform movement is that the Torah was written at a point in time, so the rules have variations based on the time period that you're living.
I see.
Does that sound
I see that completely.
reasonably close
As
to
I
the three?
as I matured and learned more about my own religion, I loved it because it allowed for change. It wasn't a stagnant religion. It allowed for change. Exactly what you were saying.
Yeah, no,
It lives within its time.
yeah, that's a pretty good elevator pitch. I mean, it's a little more nuanced than that because, of course, there within the conservative movement, you have both. We believe that God wrote it, and we believe that people wrote it. But yeah, that's a pretty good pitch.
But that the tradition and change slogan, I mean, for that, it sounds like what they're saying is that we don't necessarily have to, our decisions don't have to be based on rabbinical determinations. We can reevaluate those to see if they still...
Well, no. So actually, I would say actually quite the opposite. They do have to be based in rabbinical interpretation. That's the tradition part. So what they're saying, I think, is, and this is something that the conservative movement hasn't gotten enough credit for, that they can make changes, but those changes have to come from a place of learning and tradition. So if you look, for example, at all of the changes the conservative movement has made, they've all been steeped in real learning and real tradition, and the responsa that they write are profoundly learned. I mean, they're and the conservative movement hasn't gotten enough credit for it because they're just amazing. Many of the responsa that they've written. So I think I would tweak what you said just a little bit and say that they do make changes, but those changes always come from a place of learning and tradition.
What does really matter if you belong to the Reform or the Conservative? Because with my background, I should really be in the Reform, but I like it here.
Right. Look, I don't think movements matter at all. I don't,
It doesn't matter.
Well, that's why I'm not part of the conservative movement. Officially, I'm not a conservative rabbi. I'm just a rabbi. I don't believe in movements. I think they have been not helpful.
It's divided us.
They've divided us, right? But like Dina, you said earlier that when everyone just kind of makes up their own thing, it makes it harder to make a movement. I do recognize the power of having a movement. I mean, I get it. I'm not naive to the camaraderie and the community that can come from having a.
Yeah, you gotta feel that you belong somewhere.
Yes. But I feel like, in the Orthodox world, they know what they stand for. In the Reform world, they know what they stand for. In the Orthodox world, it's Torah Sinai, Torah from Sinai. In the Reform world, it's social action. In the conservative world, it's okay, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. We pray more in Hebrew. We tell people they can't use their cell phones in synagogue, but that's right after we turn the microphones on. That's.
David, can I get my little question in?
Yes.
What is the conservative movement? What is their take on same-sex marriage?
They've just recently updated their change. They just started allowing
Interfaith marriage.
gay marriage.
Gay marriage.
Oh, gay marriage.
So it's been in process over the years, but they pretty much fully accept it at this point.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's so ridiculous.
As long as both parties are Jewish.
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise it would be interfaith.
Yeah, but what about the Bible, the abomination phrase? Is that in our Bible or the Christian Bible?
No, that's in our Bible.
It's there.
So what you need to do is you need to go back from season 1 of The West Wing. I think it's season 1. And there's a great. So I'm rewatching every episode. This is the third time I've rewatched this.
Oh, I love that.
Oh my God, the smartest sitcom or show ever made. So there's an episode where President Bartlett is speaking to a bunch of TV talk show or radio talk show personalities, and one of them is this crazy right-wing Christian, being gay is an abomination person, and he gives the most amazing little sermonette to her. He says, you're an expert in the Bible, so I was wondering, when I stoned my daughter for for
Adultery.
for whatever.
Uh-huh.
Do I have to use large stones, and do I have to invite the entire community? And when he takes all these other biblical abomination commands, and he asks, and his point, of course, is that you're cherry picking, right? You can't say that the Torah says you have to stone someone who's gay and then not also stone someone who breaks the Sabbath, because it says both.
Yes.
Right? So you can't have it both ways. Either you're going to stone everyone or you're not going to stone everyone. So that's one perspective. Another way, though, is to reinterpret the text itself and to understand it in context. And there's a lot of scholarship that says that, number one, that when you understand that particular piece of text in the context of the other texts that are around it, that it doesn't mean what it says at surface value. Also, and this is, I think, what you said before, or maybe Dina, if we remember the context in which it was written, the time in the world in which it was written, we understand it differently now.
Right.
Also, if you want to be very, very specific, it doesn't say homosexuality. There's no such thing as homosexuality in the Bible.
I'm confused.
No, it doesn't say that. It says you should not lay with the...
it says a man should not lie with a man as he lies with a woman.
Right.
Okay, but what's the difference? Wait a minute. The rabbinic said we should look at that in the time that it was written. But isn't that what you're saying about the rabbinic writings? They were, Andrew was saying, they were written, or some sects of Judaism look at the period they were written in. What I'm talking about is in the Torah.
I would say it's true for both.
Oh, but are we allowed to change the words of God or say the words of God were given to us in a certain period of history and therefore may not work today?
Well, okay, so if you want to be orthodox about it and say that God wrote the Torah, then yeah, that's going to be a problem for you.
Oh, okay. So
But
the Orthodox would not do say that.
No.
Ah, okay.
No, that's not true. That's not true. There are some people, Rabbi Stephen Greenberg is a famous one. Is it Stephen Greenberg? Yes, no. Yeah, Steve Greenberg. He's a famous Orthodox Jew who's gay. And he speaks all over the world about how to balance those two. And what he says is the Bible is actually very, very specific. It doesn't talk about homosexuality. It talks about one specific sexual act. A man shall not lie with a man as he lies with a woman. How does a man lie with a woman? Penetration. So what he says is the only thing the Bible is prohibiting is homosexual penetration. Essentially anal sex.
Okay.
That's how he understands it.
And to go by that road, I mean, that tenant, read about, doing surveys about 60%, I think the figure is, of homosexual couples engage in that act. So basically, for that, you might be discounting 2 out of 3, but I don't want to ask anybody about what they're doing at home to find out whether they're the 1 or the 2.
Right.
Out of 3.
Look, Andrew, the truth is, we never ask our congregants, do you shop on Shabbat? We don't have criteria for our heterosexual members,
Right.
About any other law.
Right.
Why would we ask about that? Right? Boy, we really went off the reservation here, didn't we?
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Can I add something?
Remember, we were going through a list of things that the conservatives did and didn't accept. We were talking about the different marriages.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to be sure I understood that last one.
Yeah, of course. Go ahead, Lillian.
I was just saying, just as we are arguing the homosexuality because of certain words that are written in the text of the Bible, we can also go back to another ritual that was in the ancient world, and that was the animal in order to to observe the Shabbat and to have a service in the temple, you had to sacrifice an animal and burn the parts that you didn't want. That we completely disregard that because it doesn't apply to today's world.
So that's not really. So we don't really disregard that.
No,
we're not allowed to do it.
No.
We're not allowed to do it because the temple isn't standing. If the temple were standing, hypothetically, we would still be doing it.
Would we?
Yeah.
I'd
like to think that we wouldn't, but that's not so much. That didn't change because we decided it was outdated. That changed because the temple. If you the only place you're allowed to sacrifice is in the temple. There are lots of things that have changed.
But there was also a reason for the use of the animal. I mean, I understand that. I mean, it wasn't just thrown away.
Sure, absolutely.
It was the food for the priests.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it was within its time.
Yes, but that's different than some of the other practices that have changed because, times have changed. Yeah. So. All right.
Okay.
So we'll pick up at verse 5. We'll start with the beginning of verse 5 again, I think, next week.
Okay.
All righty?
All right.
Okay.
Mom,
Have a good week.
send me the link.
Bye.
Send me the link.
I sent it already, darling.
Have a very, very good week.
We'll see you next week.
We'll see you next week.
Yeah.
Yes, I'll be there. Bye.
All right, bye.
Bye,
Bye, Tina.
bye.
Bye, Andrew.
Okay.